All right. I think we've waited long enough, gosh darn it. Let me gently toss this other book to the side. Books are a very substantial staple for me. They're everywhere. Oh, God. Oh, God. They're encroaching in the best way possible. So, welcome back to another thrilling and chilling installment of Free Read Fridays. I'm keeping the same numerical sequence as I had for Storytime Saturdays because it's part of the same series, as far as I'm concerned. Just had to change the date. And therefore the name. It wouldn't make any sense to be called Storytime Saturdays if it's on Friday. That'd be dumb. So, today we've got The Freeze Frame Revolution by Peter Watts. Um, I'm really not sure where to start. I do have to make sure. That's what I need to do. Um, there are images I need to get, but I got most of them. So this is a cool book, because every part, every arc, chapter, if you will, has like an image cover page, which is pretty. Most of them are pretty rad, and I kind of wanted to get a hold of all of them, and I only have one of them, and it's from like 3/4 of the way through the book for some reason, because I'm smart. Um, there is an image, though, that I'll be using quite frequently, which indicates the general design of the ship that they're on, if you can call it that. You can. It is a ship. Um, well, the version I have is not in color, though. Interesting. Okay. Well, in any case, it's also got a cute gimmick in the book where it's actually got a hidden message in the book. Um, yeah, it's like secrets and passcodes and whatnot. Where as I'm reading the text, there'll be a letter that is in red. The rest of it's in black, but there'll be like a letter here and there that is red. Um, and I know what the message is, but you people don't. Um, I'll I meant to come up with a really clever way of putting it in there, and it didn't happen yet because I didn't figure out how to put like a red or a black box with red text in it because I don't know my color codes. And I don't know how to do that on Streamlabs OBS. So bear with it for this first stream, me not having that, but I'll start adding them in. So the back of the book reads, "How do you stage a mutiny when you are only awake one day in a million? How do you conspire when your tiny handful of potential allies changes with each shift? How do you engage an enemy that never sleeps, that sees through your eyes and hears through your ears, and relentlessly, honestly, only wants what's best for you? Sunday Ahzmundin is about to find out." So, Sunday is our main character. She's interesting. She kind of gives me some vibes of Lenny Clark from the Rifters trilogy, which is Starfish, Maelstrom, and Behemoth, or Beta Hemoth, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Um, which I do recommend, so long as you're willing to put up with a lot of grimdark. It's people are not nice to each other in that series. I don't mean just not nice. I mean really, really, really not very nice. It's pretty unpleasant. Then again, a lot of people are unpleasant anyway, so them's the breaks. All right. So give me one sec to get another sip of water here, and without further ado, I guess we'll get it started. I'll do my best in terms of auditory presentation. Um, I may not show. Actually, one sec. I want to look something up real quick. Google. Images. Unless there's a better image browser. Freeze frame revolution. Chapter pages. Chapter images. Page images. Oh, if I can find a PDF. Do 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 do. Oh, here we go. Nope. Nope, 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 nope. Ah, here we go. PDF maybe? Because if I can just get those specific pages. I had a PDF shown to me. Ah, here we go. I can work with this. I can work with this. Wow, that image resolution is bad. Okay. Okay, this is not the time for this. I will deal with this later. I will deal with this later. It is not necessary for now. Suffice it to say, I'll try and get up, even though most of them will become irrelevant. Um, I'll try and get the images of these, even if I have to take photos of them or scan them in myself, although scanning is absolute murder on books. And I try to avoid it. All right. Without further ado. The Freeze Frame Revolution by Peter Watts. In memory of Banana/Chip. They hated each other. Back when we first shipped out, I played this game with myself. Every time I thawed, I'd tally up the length of our journey so far, then check to see when we'd be if Ariophora, which is the name of the ship, were a time machine, if we'd been moving back through history instead of out through the cosmos. Oh look, all the way back to the Industrial Revolution in the time it took us to reach our first build. 2 builds took us to the Golden Age of Islam, 7 to the Shang Dynasty. I guess it was my way of trying to keep some kind of connection, to measure this most immortal of endeavors on a scale that meat could feel in the gut. It didn't work out, though. Did exactly the opposite, in fact. Ended up rubbing my nose in the sheer absurd hubris of even trying to contain the diaspora within the pitiful limits of earthbound history. For starters, the chimp didn't thaw anyone out until the seventh gate, almost 6,000 years into the mission. I slept through almost all of human civilization. Didn't even have to wake up until the fall of the Minoans. I think Kai may have been on deck for the Pyramid of Cheops, but by the time Chimp called me back from the crypt, we were all the way into the last ice age. After that, we were passing through the Paleolithic, 5,000 gates built, only 300 requiring meat on deck, and we'd barely finished our first circuit of the Milky Way. I gave up after Australopithecus. It had been a stupid game, a child's game, doomed from the start. We were just cavemen, only the mission was transcendent. I don't know exactly what moved me to pick up that kiddie pastime again. I'd learned my lesson the first time around, and space itself has only grown vaster in the meantime. But I gave it another shot after everything went south. Called up the clocks, subtracted the centuries. We've been around the disk 32 times now, left over 100,000 gates in our wake. We've scoured so many raw materials that God, looking down from overhead, could probably trace out our path by the jagged spiral of tiny bubbles sucked clean of ice and gravel. 66 million years by the old calendar. That's how long we've been on the road, all the way back to the end of the Cretaceous. Give or take a few millennia, the revolution happened on the day one of Areophora's pint-sized... whoops. Give or take a few millennia, the revolution happened on the day one of Areophora's pint-sized siblings punched Earth in the face and wiped out the dinosaurs. I don't know why, but I find that kind of funny. Occasional demons. It was the Monoceros build that broke her. The gremlin came out of the gate a split second after we booted it up, as if the fucking thing had been waiting the whole time, hunger and hatred building with every second of every century we'd been crawling across the void to set it free. Maybe it was whatever humanity turned into after Areophora shipped out. Maybe it was something that came along after, something that swallowed humanity whole and raced along our conquered highways in search of loose ends to devour. It doesn't matter. It never matters. We birthed the gate. The gate birthed an abomination. This one stirred something in me, a faint, familiar echo I couldn't quite put my finger on. That happens more often than you might think. Rack up enough gigasecs on the road, and you're bound to start seeing the same models in your rear view eventually. The usual protocols saved us. Deceleration in the wake of a boot is just another word for suicide. The radiation erupting from a newborn wormhole would turn us into ash long seconds before the occasional demon had a chance to gulp us down. So we threaded that needle as we always did, rode our bareback singularity through a hoop barely twice as wide as we were, closed the circuit at 60,000 kps, connected there to here without ever slowing down. We trusted the rules hadn't changed, that math and physics and the ass-saving geometry of distance squared would water down the wavefront before it caught up with us. We outran the rads, we outran the gremlin, and as two kinds of uncertain death redshifted to stern chimp, whoops. And as two kinds of uncertain death redshifted to stern, Chimp threw a little yellow icon onto the corner of my eye. Medical assistance? And I didn't know why until I turned to Leanne and saw that she was shaking. I reached out. Leanne, are you? She waved me away. Her breathing was fast and shallow. Her pulse jumped in her throat. I'm okay. I'm just... Medical assistance? I could see a fragile kind of control trying to assert itself. I saw it struggle and weaken and not entirely succeed. But her breathing slowed. Medical assistance? Medical assistance? I killed the icon. Leanne, what's the problem? You know it can't catch us. She gave me a look I'd never seen before. You don't know what they can do. You don't even know what they are. You don't know anything. I know they'd have maybe 10 kilosecs to get up to 20% light speed from a standing start to even try to catch up. I know anything that could pull that off would have been able to squash us like a bug long before now, if it wanted to. You know that too. She used to, anyway. Is that how you do it? A small giggle, a sound too close to the edge of hysteria. Do? Is that how you deal with it? If it never happened, it never will? 5 of us on deck for the build, and I have to be the one at her side when she loses it. Lee, where's this coming from? 95% of the time, the gate just sits there. As if that's any better! She spread her hands, a paradoxical gesture of defeat and defiance. How long have we been doing this? You know as well as I do. Furthering the human empire, whatever it's turned into by now. As if this was any kind of news. So we build another gate and nothing comes out. They're extinct? They don't care? They just forgot about us? I opened my mouth. Or, she went on, we build a gate and something tries to kill us. Or we build a gate, I said firmly, and something wonderful happens. Remember the bubbles? Remember those gorgeous bubbles? They'd boiled through the hoop like rainbows, iridescent and beautiful, dancing around each other as they grew to the size of cities and then just faded away. Their invocation got me a small, broken smile. Yeah, what were those things? They didn't eat us. That's my point. Didn't even try. We're still alive, Leanne. We're doing fine. Better than fine. We've overperformed on any axis you could name. And we're exploring the galaxy. How can you have forgotten how amazing that is? Back on Earth, they never could have dreamed of the things we've seen. Living the non-dream, she giggled again. That's just fucking aces, Sunday. I watched some biomechanical monstrosity fade behind us. I watched a swarm of icons flicker and update in the tack tank. I watched the deck plating glint in the dim bridge light. Why can't they just talk to us? Say hello now and again. Just once, even. I don't know. You ever hop over to Madagascar before we shipped out? Look up any tree shrews? Thank them for the helping hand? What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Just. I shrugged. I think they've got other priorities by now. It should be over. They were supposed to call us back millions of years ago. No. She held up a shaky hand. We were not supposed to go on forever. How many times have we tunneled through this fucking ring already? She threw an arm wide. Chimp, misreading the gesture, sprinkled the local star field across the backs of our brains. We could be the only ones left. We still could have gated the whole disk ourselves by now. I tried for a chuckle. It's a big galaxy. We'll have to go a few more circuits before there's much chance of that. And we will. You can count on it. Until the drive evaporates and the chimp runs out of juice and the last of us rots away in the crypt like a piece of moldy fruit. She glanced back at the tack tank through its vistas, though its vistas floated in our heads as well. We've done the job, Sunday. We're way past mission expiration. Eri was never supposed to last this long. We weren't. She took a breath, let it out. Surely we've done enough. Are you talking about killing yourself? Because I honestly didn't know. No, she shook her head. No, of course not. Then what do you want? I mean, here we are. Where else can we be? Maybe Madagascar? She smiled then, absurdly. Maybe they left us a spot, next to the tree shrews. I'm sure they did, judging by that last one we saw. Oh, Jesus, son. Her face collapsed in on itself. I just want to go home. I gave physical contact another shot. Leanne, this is. Is it really? But at least she didn't shake me off this time. There's nowhere else. Earth, if it even still exists, it's not ours anymore. We're tree shrews, she whispered. Yeah, kind of. Well, then, maybe there's still a warm, wet forest somewhere for us to hole up in. That's you, ever the fucking optimist. And when she didn't respond, Build's over, Leanne. Time to stand down. I promise. Things will look brighter in a couple thousand years. Park and Victor, jaded by builds beyond number, had sat out the boot in favor of a little cubby time. We reconvened afterward in a cerulean sky, to unwind before heading back to the crypts. Three of us did, anyway. Leanne, as usual, preferred her own setting, a sun-dappled glade in an old-growth forest generated from some long-dead South American archive. The system was smart enough to reconcile incompatible realities, strategically placed each of us in the other's scenario without any awkward overlaps. So we sat there, sprawled on pseudopods in the stratosphere, or arrayed around some grassy forest floor, sipping drugs and toasting another successful build. Park and Victor, still gripped by the post-coital fuzzies, lay with their legs draped over each other, Park absently finger-painting onto his scroll. Leanne sat cross-legged on her own pod, in this world anyway. For all I knew, she was squatting on a lily pad in her own. Callie was nowhere to be seen. It turned in early, Victor said when I asked. I tipped my glass at Park's scroll. New piece? Clockwork in D minor. It's pretty good, Victor said. It's crap, Park grunted, but it's getting there. It is not crap. Victor glanced over at Leanne. Leanne, you've heard. She just sat there, folded into herself, staring at the flagstones. Lee? We, had a bit of a moment, I explained. After the boot, I squirted footage of the gremlin. Park looked up. Huh? Are those jaws? Victor wondered. Maybe some kind of Waldo, I suggested. Victor tapped his thumb and fingers together, claw-like. Maybe that's just how we say hello these days. And after a moment, I don't suppose it actually did say anything. Not on any wavelength we could hear. Post-human mating ritual, Park suggested. No dumber than anything else I've heard. I shrugged. If they were trying to kick our asses, you'd think they'd have figured out particle beams or missiles by now. Make more sense than running after us with their mouths hanging open. For Leanne, of course. But still she said nothing, her eyes fixed on the ground. Or maybe some nightmare she could see beneath it. Suddenly, no one else was saying anything either. Suddenly, no one else was saying anything either. Oh, wait, I just said that. Half memory clicked, solidified. You know what that thing really looks like? That tarantula, what's his name, snuck on board. Blank looks. The front end, I mean, with the fangs, and those little globule things that look like eyes. There's a tarantula on board? Park asked, after just long enough to have pinged the archive for a definition of tarantula. Not a regular one, engineered. Takes it into his coffin with him between shifts. Says it'll live a good 200 active years if no one steps on it. Victor. Who says? The guy, Tarantula Boy. I looked around the patio. Nobody? Different tribe? Victor suggested. Chimp did that sometimes, dropped a member from one tribe into rotation with another as a hedge against any disaster that might decimate a social group. Easier to integrate into a group you already know, or something. I raised my eyes to the heavens. Chimp? You know who I'm talking about?
No one named Tarantula Boy was assigned to Ariophora, Chimp reported. That's not his name, that's just what he was. Can you describe him?
Dark hair, average height, whitish. I strained for details. Really nice guy? Victor rolled his eyes. He kept a tarantula on his shoulder. That doesn't narrow the field a bit?
Sorry, Chimp said. I'm not getting any hits.
It would have been contraband, Victor pointed out. He'd have cranked his personal privacy settings at the very least.
He had a point. Ares' biosphere was fine-tuned for ecological balance and perpetual motion. Mission Control, clinically obsessive, would have taken a very dim view of anything it considered even remotely invasive. Leanne stood, flickered. Lee, turning in? She shook her head.
Think I might just go for a walk first. Take in something real for a change.
Caves and tunnels, Victor remarked. You're welcome to 'em.
Who knows? She managed a smile. Maybe I'll find Easter Island.
Good luck with that.
She vanished. Another nomad, Park said. Another? You do realize she's following in your footsteps. Which I hadn't. Although I did tend to wander the corridors after a build, shoot the shit with Chimp before bedding down. Anyone notice anything off about her? I asked. Victor stretched, yawned.
Like?
I wondered how I'd feel if someone spread news of my private breakdown all over the tribe, and opted for discretion. She didn't seem kinda subdued.
Maybe, after you made that crack about getting shot at by gremlins.
Then again, Park added, you'd expect that sort of reaction from someone who's been shot at by gremlins. What? She was on deck when. Park saw it in my face. You don't know. Know what?
Something took a shot at us, Victor explained. Few builds back.
What? Hit us too, Park added. Big divot on the starboard side, 20 meters deep. Half a degree to the left and we'd be out of the finals. Fuck. It came out a whisper. I had no idea. Park frowned. Don't you check the mission logs? I would have if I'd known. I shook my head. Also, someone could have told me, you know?
We just did,
Victor pointed out. It was 500 years ago. Park shrugged. 100 light years away.
500 years is nothing, Victor said. Call me in a few billion. Then we'll talk.
Yeah, but. Yeah, but. Suddenly, why all my reassuring words had fallen so flat. Jeez, maybe we should build some guns or something. Park snorted. Right. Chimp would really smile on that. We had a legend, we denizens of Ariophora, of a cavern, deep aft, almost as far back as the launch thrusters themselves, filled with diamonds. Not just ordinary diamonds either, the uncut hexagonal shit. Lonsdaleite, the toughest solid in the whole damn solar system, back when we shipped out at least, and laser readable to boot. Build your backups out of anything less, and you might as well be carving them from butter. Nothing's immortal on a road trip of 1 billion years. The universe runs down in stop motion around you. Your backups need backups. Not even the error-correcting replication strategies cadged from biology can keep the mutations at bay forever. Blech, can keep the mutations at bay forever. It was true for us meatsicles cycling through mayfly moments every 1,000 years. It was just as true for the hardware.
It was so obvious I never even thought about it. By the time I did, the chimp was on his 83rd reincarnation. Not enough that his nodes bred like flies and distributed themselves to every far corner of the asteroid. Not enough that the circuits themselves were almost paleolithically crude. When your AI packs less than half the synapse count of a human brain, fiddling around at nanoscales is just grandstanding. Things fall apart. Conduits decay. Circuits a dozen molecules thick would just evaporate over time, even if entropy and quantum tunneling didn't degrade them down to sponge first. Every now and then, you have to renovate. And so was born the Archive, a library of backups, cubist slabs of diamond statuary larger than life, commemorations of some unsullied ancestral state. Someone back at the dawn of time named it Easter Island. Curious, I pinged the archives and dredged up an entry about some scabby rock back on Earth in the middle of nowhere, known primarily for the fact that its pre-tech inhabitants destroyed their environment for no better reason than to build a bunch of butt-ugly statues in commemoration of long-dead ancestors. What else would we call it? So, when the inventory of backup chimps ran too low, or of grav lenses, or air conditioners, or any other vital artifact more short-lived than a proton, Airy would send lumbering copy editors back to its own secret Easter Island, where they would read mineral blueprints so vast, so stable, they might outlast the Milky Way. The place wasn't always so secret, mind you. We'd trooped through it a dozen times during construction, a dozen more in training. But one day, maybe our third or fourth pass through the Sagittarius Arm, Gora went spelunking at the end of a shift while the rest of us lay dead in the crypt. Just killing time, he told me later, staving off the inevitable shutdown with a little recreational reconnaissance. He hiked down into the high G zone, wormed through crawlways and crevices to where X marked the spot, and found Easter Island scoured clean. Just a dark, gaping cavity in the rock, studded with the stubs of bolts and anchors sheared off a few centimeters above the substrate. The chimp had relocated the whole damn archive while we'd slept between the stars. He wouldn't tell us where. He couldn't tell us, he insisted. Said just been following pre-recorded instructions from mission control, hadn't been aware of them himself until some timer ticked over and injected new instructions into his job stack. He couldn't even tell us why. I believed him. When was the last time programmers explained themselves to the code? They don't trust us, Kai said, rolling his eyes. 8 million years down the road, and they're afraid we might, what, trash our own life support? Write Sawada sucks farts on their scale models? We'd still go searching now and then, when there was time to kill and itches to scratch. We'd plant tiny charges in the rock, read the echoes vibrating through our worldlet, in search of some undiscovered grotto. The chimp didn't stop us. He never had to. In all the terrasects since Gora's discovery, we'd never found anything. Maybe Leanne thought she'd get lucky this time. Maybe she was just looking for an excuse to get away from us. Either way, I wished her luck. Find it? She was in the middle of the usual funeral rites, clearing out her suite for whoever got it next time around. It took me maybe 2 minutes to do that. A couple of favorite jumpers I'd grown inexplicably fond of over the eons, a little standalone sculpture rig that was mine and mine alone, no matter that the rigs in Ares rec facilities ran at 10 times the res and 20 times the speed. A couple of books, real antiques, couldn't even map your eye movements, so you had to scroll the text manually. That Mom and Dad gave me at graduation, which I treasured beyond all reason, even though I'd never read them. Crappy charcoal sketches of Kai and Ishmael, legacy of an incompetent portraiture phase I went through on our third pass through Carina. That was pretty much it. Leanne, though, Leanne might have been packing for half the tribe. Wall hangings, wardrobes, a local V archive that would have been more efficiently entrusted to Aeries' own library, matching threadbare covers festooned with Penrose tiles for sleeping and pseudopods, something that looked like a rock collection for fuck's sake. She even packed her own sex toys, although the ones that came standard in each suite could have kept her occupied halfway to heat death. For all I knew, she'd been stuffing that junk into storage since the moment she'd left the party. She looked up, eyes glazed. They took a moment to find me. Huh? Easter Island. Any luck? Oh, nah, maybe next time. She jammed a final balled up pair of socks into the trunk, brought the lid down with a definitive click. Thought you'd all be cryptid by now. On my way. Just wanted to check in, see how you were doing. Just had, like you said, a moment. I'm fine. You sure? She nodded, straightened, pointed at the suitcase. It rolled to attention. In a way, pray you're lucky. Running for your life instead of running for your dinner. A weak smile. Better motivation, right? I'd checked the logs, of course. The gremlin had charged through the gate like some monstrous mutant phage. It had wobbled, perfectly reflective, like shuddering mercury, extruding and resorbing 1,000 needle-like projections, as if trying them on for size. 20 centimeter stilettos to pin your hand to the bulkhead, 1,000-meter javelins that could puncture a moon. It had sent 2 of them after us. We'd been almost 30 light secs away by then. We should have been untouchable. One missile went wide and fell astern, but the other flew straight for our tailpipe, closing at a crawl, but closing. Chimp crunched numbers and bent our wormhole a smidge to the left, just a fraction of a degree, but enough to push those stress contours out past hardline channels. Rock had cracked, split under the torque. Once you've gone relativistic, the most infinitesimal change in bearing can break you apart. Aerie was bleeding from self-inflicted wounds before that javelin even caught up with us. Even then, it wasn't quite enough. It grazed us in passing, boiled away, and left a 5-kilometer scar along our starboard flank. I'd been blissfully undead for centuries to either side. Lian Wei had been right there, watching it all happen. So, that thing that took a shot at us, you know it doesn't really change anything, right? She looked at me. How's that? I mean, we've still got the edge. Even Angry Blob couldn't get to us until we booted the gate from this end. By the time they charge up and charge through, we're 10 million clicks away. The suitcase followed her into the corridor. I followed them both. Behind us, the hatch sealed with a soft hiss. Behind that, Leanne's abandoned quarters began shutting down for the long sleep. And yeah, that thing really put the fear of God into us, and something could come through with beamed weapons or faster missiles. Anything's possible. But think about this. Over 100,000 builds, and we've only been hit once. And even then, we got away pretty much unscathed. You gotta admit, those are pretty good odds. How do you know it was just once? The logs, of course. And you trust them. Lee, they're logs. The Lee, they're the logs. And they can't be corroborated because Chimp handles most builds on his own. You're saying he... Why would he doctor the record? Because he's programmed for the good of the mission, and the mission might suffer if we spent every waking hour wondering if something was going to kill us. Maybe we've almost died in our sleep 1,000 times, and he's rewriting history to protect morale. Lee, he saved our lives. You know that better than anyone. And even if you're right, even if we've been under the gun more than the logs show, That's just that many more times he saved us. A bank of lockers rounded into view, a gunmetal honeycomb stretching deck to ceiling across along the curve of the corridor. So you trust him, Leanne said. Now there's a surprise. Of course I do. Even though he could be lying to us. She hefted her luggage from the floor with a soft grunt and slotted it into an empty locker at waist height, sealed it, locked it with her thumb. You said it yourself. He's programmed for the good of the mission. From behind the locker door, the faintest hiss of air being sucked away. You know he'd die for us. Probably. She turned back down the corridor. Hey, we're still alive. I fell in beside her again. He's obviously doing something right. We walked in silence for a bit, past strange graffiti splashed along the bulkhead. Splashed across the bulkhead. I don't know why my brain is misinterpreting those words today. I see along, I think across. I see across, I think along. Ah! Painters are at it again, I see, Leanne said. I nodded. Still don't know who those fuckers are. Other than some tribe who'd taken to tagging the walls with weird-ass hieroglyphics, Chimp wouldn't tell us who. Maybe they'd told him to keep their identity hush-hush. No painter had ever passed through the bleh. No painter had ever passed through the tribe during any of Chimp's cultural exchanges, or at least no one who admitted to being one, which I'd always found a bit suspicious. I'm probably overthinking it, Leanne said, and it took me a second to remember. Chimp, gremlins, prey. I took the concession, gave a little back. I'd say you've got cause. I'd have been crapping my pants if I'd been on deck when all that went down. Someday, she stopped. Yeah? Just thanks. For? For checking in. No one else would have even thought about it. Spores. You know. I shrugged. We're designed for solitude. Yeah. She laid a hand on my shoulder. That's kind of my point.
I will see if I can get through this next chapter slash part um, before I have to scoot. It's longish. It's longer than what we just did by a little bit, but not too much, I hope. Yeah, it's a couple pages longer. Worst comes to worst, I could just do like individual parts per day or per week, and we'd still get it done probably by the end of the month. If I do this next part, getting it done by the end of the month is practically guaranteed, even if I only did one part per. And they're quite long after this one, except for the last one, which is pretty short. Okay. So yeah, a lot of stuff going on. I have not been taking note of what the special passphrase is. I know what it is. I can pull it up at the end. Um, One of the things I contemplated doing was using an ebook version of this, and then like broadcast me reading through it live and seeing if people would note the letters, but I didn't find one that was in a format that I liked or was readable with the technology I was using. I didn't want to have to
buy it for a Kindle and then emulate a Kindle to make it work, basically. And I wasn't able to find a decent PDF of it. But I'll look again. I didn't look very hard. All right. Moving right along. It moves quick, and very little is explained explicitly. So you'll just have to bear with me. I'm having more difficulty reading it aloud than I thought I would, but here we are. It's pretty short. He actually has an afterword, I think, uh, in acknowledgments that acknowledges or that states that it is intended to be a novella, but according to his publisher, it's 1,000 words over the designated limit or the transference point, where it attains critical mass and becomes a novel. So it's a novel, apparently, according to his publisher, but he considers it a novella, the author, Peter Watts. Um, and doesn't have a ton. And it's kind of one of his more fantastical ones, so he doesn't have like a giant series of references uh, that he does for like every other book he does, where he's like, here's where I got. So you noticed I used this idea in the book. This is where that idea came from, and I extrapolated accordingly. He does that. He's great like that. At the end of every book, I swear. With the exception of the first half of Behemoth, because he has it all in the second half. That one was also due to a publisher thing where it wound up being like 100 pages longer than they were willing to allow for it to be a single book. And they were like, nah, it's got to be two separate books. And he was like, but it's one book. And they were like, nah, it's 100 pages too long, split it into two books. And he's like, okay. Good times. All right. Excuse me. I'm probably going to start changing up voices at some point. These voices are all kind of tentative because Leanne becomes relevant later. And I think I'm going to wind up giving some more character to Sunday's voice at some point. Something to distinguish it from the narratorial version of same. Kind of like how I did with The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. Just because it'll get tricky. Largely because the narrative or narrator voice is kind of impersonal. It's kind of or it's convivial a lot of the time. So it can sometimes seem like if I'm using a voice that's too close, uh, like like it's talking when it's not. Meltdown. This is how you know that something has gone seriously wrong aboard Areophora. You wake up and you don't know why. What? Mouth dry, eyelids like sandpaper, whole body twitching with the tiny convulsions of a nervous system dragged back online after all its synapses have rusted shut. My interface. I'm sorry, Sunday. This is an emergency resurrection. There wasn't time to pre-brief you. How fast? A little over 2 hours. Your cells could rupture coming back that fast. Your brain could get frostbite. I opened my mouth, closed it again. A racking cough hovered at the back of my throat, threatened to blow my chest open if I let it out. Relax, Chimp said. You're in no danger. I kept my eyes closed and swallowed on a throat lined with broken glass. Something nudged my cheek. I took the nipple in my mouth, sucked reflexively, reveled in a flood of sweet, salty warmth. I need help with a personnel issue. A pause, a small staticky pop behind my eyes. sparse icons blooming in my head. You're online, Chimp confirmed. I'd only been down for 30 gigasecs, not even 1,000 years. If this was a build, surely someone else was on rotation. Right, there it was. Osmont Gurnier, Burkhard Skidkowski, and Delib Laporta. Not our tribe. Children of Eri, they called themselves. Rock worshippers. Lian Wei. Chimp was cross-fertilizing again. But the build had gone off without a hitch, according to the logs. Dirt common red dwarf, a whole lot of comets and asteroids, which was why Chimp had decrypted a crew. Mass distribution had exceeded some programmed complexity threshold. A standard pass-through hoop that booted without incident, nothing charging out the gate after us, good for good or for ill. The shift was already over. Everyone had already packed up and headed for bed. So why? I opened my eyes, stared up from my coffin into blurry darkness, and a circle of bright overlapping halos. Lian Wei is upset, Chimp told me. I'm hoping you can calm her. My throat had soaked up those electrolytes like a meaty sponge. I cleared it experimentally. Much better. Upset how? She's arguing with the other spores. She's increasingly hostile. Uh, a residual cough. About what? I think about me. The halos resolved into a circular constellation of ceiling lights. One of Chimp's eyes stared down from its center, a tiny dark heart in a bright ring. I brought one hand toward my face. My elbow felt like an exploding schematic. Here's the socket. Here's the little cartilaginous bearing within. Here are the vectors that'll make the whole assembly go sproing in an agonizing explosion of springs and hinges if you push it just a little further. I'd never experienced intramortem arthritis before. You only get it if they bring you back too fast. An icon was flashing, a window into someone else's first person. Skidkowski, according to the subtitle. He was staring along a service crawlway infested with plumbing and fiber. A figure crouched in shadow a couple meters farther in. Something sparked in its hand. I caught a blur of motion, movement into light, a coiled spring released. Lian, stabbing Burkhart Skidkowski in the face. The window closed. It looked worse than it was, Chimp insisted as I what the fucked my way out of the sarcophagus and slipped and hung on tight to keep from falling. Leanne was armed with nothing more lethal than a splicing torch. She'd been futzing around in the trunk line when they'd found her, delivered a nasty burn to the side of Skidkowski's head, fried the toggle on his interface, but nothing worse. He'd withdrawn, she'd retreated back up the tunnel, everyone was sitting tight until the mediator showed up. A faint whine in the dark distance. I turned, squinted. 30 meters away, another coffin jutted from a bulkhead built of coffins, a teleop sucking its insides clean with a hose. Probably a stranger. Chimp kept members of each tribe spaced wide in the crypt. In different crypts entirely, even. So that when a seal broke, a circuit failed, someone died in their sleep and rotted away in the long dark, the spore waking up next to them would give less of a shit. Still, I had to ask. Anyone I know? Between coughs. No, please focus, Sunday. The whine intensified. A roach resolved from the gloom, wheeled past the new vacancy, pulled up at my side. I fell into it. Chimp drove me to the nearest tube. Why me? She trusts you. What? Jesus, Chimp, you want to slow down on these turns? I could run the roach myself, even hung over, but not at the speeds evidently deemed necessary under current circumstances. If I'd had lunch any time in the past 1,000 years, I'd have lost it by now. The situation may be time sensitive, Chimp said apologetically. We careened around one last corner and into one of the tube's many maws. The roach locked down. The capsule started up. 10 times faster, but somehow easier on the gut. Gentler curves. I let my stomach settle as I magleved toward the approaching clusterfuck. By the time the tube disgorged me, I could almost walk a straight line. I ditched the roach. Walking on stage under my own steam would make for a better entrance, I figured, and closed the last dozen meters on foot. The corridor bent gently to port. I heard them before they came into view. Low voices, exasperated voices, male and female. Silences. Enter, stage left, Sunday Ahzmundin. Ahzmundin. Gurnier, said the caption over the red-headed black man standing next to a hole in the bulkhead. The detached access panel leaned to one side. La Porta, said the one floating over the black-haired brown woman slouched sideways in her roach. Introductions complete. Where's Burkhardt? Laporta gestured vaguely starboard. Went to get his face fixed. Gurnier.
So you know this idiot?
Same tribe, I said carefully.
But you're friends, right?
I took a breath. I guess. What's she done? Other than stabbing Burke in the face with a welding torch? Laporta unfolded herself from the roach and squinted into the crawlway. From my position, I could see nothing but pipes and padding in there. We don't really know. We were getting set to turn in. Burke remembered he'd left his totem back on the bridge, came back to get it, and there she was. Totem. Right. Rock worshippers. She say anything? Told us to fuck off in no uncertain terms. Anything on the diagnostics? Nope.
No eyes in there, Gurnier said.
Course not. Everything in those trunks was part of Chimp's nervous system anyway. If anything happened in there, he'd feel it. Crazy bitch, Laporta remarked. Keeps going on about how we've outlived our usefulness and how the whole Spore program, how'd she put it, Oz?
Humanity's head up the galaxy's ass, Gurnier remembered.
That's it. Laporta shook her head. I mean, how'd she ever get on board with an attitude like that? We boarded a long time ago. Have I changed? Have you? She took silence for assent. We're spores. We don't change. I spread my hands, conceding the point. Guess I better talk to her.
She's all yours, Gurnier said. We're going down.
Before some other batshit thing comes along, Laporta added. Mind if I take your jumper? I shivered briefly. Chimp hadn't given me time to get dressed. She peeled down, handed it over. Anything else? Actually, yeah. They waited. You folks ever seen a guy with a tarantula? Leanne. Sunday? What are you doing up? Chimp thawed me. What's going on in there? Come in, find out. She'd blocked her feed. No way to see what was in there but to see what was in there. I bent down to the opening. Toggle off, she said. I'm inviting you in, nothing else. I sighed, killed my bud, climbed inside with naked eyes. No headroom to speak of. I moved forward on hands and knees in gray, oily twilight. The trunk line, a wide, flat conduit pulling double duty as a floor, was rubbery elastomer. Everything else was pipes and fiber, brackets, braces, and humming prickly electricity. Leanne crouched like an animal in a burrow, 4 meters in. Her face looked surprisingly haggard for someone who'd just had a few epochs sleep. She'd opened the trunk line. Sorry about this, dragging you out of bed and all. You planned that? She shook her head. I didn't plan on getting caught, but, well, I'm glad you're here, if it had to be anyone. She'd spliced in a bypass around a 30-centimeter length of fiber. It looked sensory, although I couldn't tell for sure without my interface. But it was a bypass without a function. The main line was still intact. Probably she hadn't got around to cutting it before Burkhart caught her. I looked up. What? Just as her finger landed gently on my lip. Shh. If you can't figure it out, she said, I'm not going to tell you. Just because I trust you doesn't mean I killed my BUD, Lee, just like you asked. You think it doesn't have audio pickups in the corridor? You don't think it can hear us even with... Then what am I doing here? If you aren't even going to... I don't know, okay? I panicked. And I could really use a friend right now. I sighed. Fine, we can go someplace dark, someplace he can't listen in, if that's so important. But then you damn well tell me what's going on, right? She thought a moment. Her head bobbed up and down. I gestured to the trunk line. Close that up. And backed away on hands and knees, heading ass first, back to the access. I know just the place. Areophora's riddled with blind spots, shadows in crawlways and corners, in the spaces behind looming machinery where no one had any reason to put a camera. There are even places, near power lines whose massive currents swamp the milliamp signals connecting artificial brains to natural ones, where chimp is blind to our cortical links. We weren't going to any of those places. We were going deeper, shooting at breakneck speeds through vacuum tunnels with superconductor ribs, and I was half blind, and I didn't like it. There are times you kill your link. During stasis, during sleep, sometimes in your quarters, during sex or games or touring. Times you don't want to be distracted by the autonomic ticks and talks of this great stone beast we live in. Not on shift, though. Not out in the open. Naked eyes don't see anything, just images without annotation. I felt disabled, like I could take one wrong turn and be lost forever, like I might forget the names of people I'd known my whole life, like I could look at some common object and not even know what it was. It wasn't even as though this self-imposed blindness bought us any privacy. Chimp had pickups in this capsule as in every other. The only thing denied by Leanne's small defiance was a couple of redundant first-person viewpoints. Evidently, there was some kind of principle involved. Now we were decelerating. Our bodies tugged invisibly forward as we coasted into a terminus deep in the heavy zone. Leanne tapped her temple, and her eyes flickered with those darting saccades that said, "Online." I booted up my own link, tried not to take too much relief from the familiar garden of reawakened icons. They wouldn't last. That was the whole point. You gain about 30% down there. It's not intolerable. All the serious tidal shit happens further in, near the core where you go from 13 Gs to 300 in barely 2 clicks. But it's not pleasant. Our destination was barely 50 meters along the corridor, but it felt like twice that by the time we arrived. Or maybe it was something else. Maybe some other kind of inertia weighed us down. Maybe, now the journey was ended and our excuses almost gone, we just didn't want to break the silence. The deck slanted here, like a steel beach. A broad basement door at the waterline marked our destination. The name of that place was stenciled right into the alloy. It also hung in midair, a virtual meter ahead of me, thanks to my reawakened link. Forest Access 17T. The hatch slid smoothly back into the bulkhead at our approach. Its bearings did not complain. It did not squeak or grind against its rail, as though it had just been built yesterday, as though it hadn't been waiting 10,000 frozen years or more for the chance to move. That hatch opened like a mouth, and it was dark inside. Leanne turned, broke our fragile silence. After you. We went in. Forget everything they might have told you about Ares forests. The genes tweaked for maximum bifurcation. The dim, bulbous fruit alight with glowing bacteria, their TNA straitjacketed with sulfur bonds and secondary loops to impede mutation. Big concave leaves, black as heat death, curving around those microbial nightlights like hands cupped around a candle flame. The faint blue suns scattered here and there, some a meter across, some 10 or more, pulsing with their own bioluminescence. Blind, deaf gardener bots with cockroach brains, sniffing their way along the branches. Not even linked in, just mass fabbed and set loose to recycle carbon and scrape nutrients from dead rock. The plumbing that collects our freeze-dried waste and distributes it to hungry rootlets. All the tricks that let you cram an ecosystem into a couple dozen caverns, slowed down so it might last forever. A bottled biosphere that would barely sustain a handful at regular rates of metabolism, but keeps 30,000 of us alive just so long as we only take a breath every decade or so. Forget all that. Take one look and you'll see how they really did it. They built their forests from the blood vessels of slaughtered giants, flushed out the blood and replaced it with tar. They pumped that shiny black sludge through the heart, the aorta, out into branching arteries and veins, and the endless recursive capillary beds that connected the one to the other. After it hardened, they burned away the surrounding meat with lasers and acetylene. They took what was left, obsidian plexi, branches, bone, broke it into pieces, and installed them wherever they'd fit. A vast misty caverns too big to see across, modest little grottos barely 70 meters end to end. Then they draped it all in blue Christmas lights. We call it the forest because they're technically contiguous. Each chamber connects to the others by ducts and tunnels drilled through the rock, stringing everything together in the name of systems integration and the interconnectedness of all things. Everything has to be stable, you see. No mission so epic can afford to keep all its life support eggs in one basket, but you can't have all those pocket ecosystems going off in pursuit of their own selfish equilibria either. So all is connected. There's enough flow through to keep everything on the same page. Even if all those tunnels do come with their own drop gates, the better to instantly isolate one glade from the others should some cataclysm break us into pieces. I know this better than most. One of my specialties is life support. I've always thought of Area 4's forests as a refuge, I guess. They're where Kai and I always seem to hash out our differences. It's nicely atmospheric for sex. There's warm in the darkness, a softness to the nightlight glow of bacteria in their bulbs. The air smells of life instead of rock and metal. 17T was darker, more chaotic than most. The Leaning Glade, we called it. Well, what most of us called it anyway. Kai preferred the Vomit Vale, but his inner ears were on the sensitive side, and even he didn't get woozy unless he wandered into the forward reaches where gravity smeared under your feet. The hatch closed at our backs, swallowing us in brief darkness. It brightened to dim twilight as our eyes adjusted to Ana-Luciferan constellations. Ana-Luciferan constellations glowing on all sides. We stood on a catwalk, taking deep, grateful breaths half a meter above bedrock blanketed in drifts of thin soil. We followed the path. My BUD flickered. Bud flickered. The catwalk forked. I nudged Leanne to the right. This way. After a few meters, I closed my eyes experimentally, experienced just the slightest uncertainty over the direction of down. Glistening black meshes with gelatinous eyeballs glowing at their interstices. Thick, ropey trunks arcing up through the vault like a great charred rib cage. Arching up. They leaned just a little, as though bent by wind. Bud flickered again, faded, sparked back to life. We pushed on in the direction of that imaginary wind. The trees leaned further as we advanced. Their bases thickened and spread wide across the ground, trunks buttressed against forces pulling simultaneously along different bearings. The glade passes over the Higgs conduit, between the core that contains our singularity and the maw where its wormhole emerges. The vectors get messy in between. Down is mostly coreward, but a little forward too. How far those downs diverge depends on how fast Airy happens to be falling through the cosmos at any given moment. Twisted trees and Kai's squicky inner ears are the price we pay for a reactionless drive. Bud finally went down and stayed down, a victim of signal squelching rocks and bioelectric static, and drive circuitry that couldn't possibly be expected to contain such vast energies without emitting some of its own. The dead air was our privacy alarm. As long as we were blind, we were alone. So what the hell were you doing, Lee? She didn't answer at first. She didn't answer at all. Instead, you read books, right? Sure, sometimes. You plug in, tour, watch Eddies. What's your point? You've seen the way people lived. Kids with cats, or hacking their tutors, or parasailing on their birthdays. So? So you don't just see it Sunday, you feed off it. You base your life on it. Our speech patterns, our turns of phrase. Fuck, our swear words, for Christ's sake. All lifted from a culture that hasn't existed for pita sacks. She took a breath. We've been out here so very long. I rolled my eyes. Enough with the world-weary ancient immortal shtick, okay? The fact that we've been out here for 60 million years, 65, doesn't change the fact that you've only been awake for 10 or 20 tops. My point is that we're living dead lives. Theirs, not ours. We never went hiking or scuba diving or... Sure we have. We can. Anytime we want. You just said so. They cheated us. We wake up, we build their fucking gates, and we recycle their lives because they never gave us any of our own. I should have pitied her. Instead, surprisingly, I found myself getting angry. Do you even remember the shape Earth was in when we left? I wouldn't trade this life for centuries on that grubby shithole if God itself came through the gate and offered me a ticket. I like this life. You like it because they built you to, because they'd never get any normal person to sign up for a one-way trip in a dead rock to the end of time, so they built this special model all small and twisted, like those plants they used to grow in Japan or somewhere, something so stunted it couldn't even imagine spending its life outside a cage. Bonsai, I remembered, but I didn't want to encourage her. You liked it here too, I said instead, until you broke. Yeah, she nodded, and even in the dimness I got the sense of a sad smile. But I got better. Leanne, what were you doing in the crawlway? She sighed. I was running a bypass on one of the chimp's sensory trunks. I saw that. What for? Nothing critical. I was just going to inject some noise into the channel. Noise. Static. To reduce signal fidelity. I spread my palms. So? I was trying to take back a little control. For all of us. How does compromising chimps... Oh. You were increasing the uncertainty threshold, I murmured. Yeah. Because the only reason Eri shipped out with meat on board in the first place was for those times the chimp didn't feel up to managing a build on his own, when he needed some of that organic human insight to get him past the unknown variables and halting states. And the less reliable his data, the less certain he'd be that he could handle it on his own. Leanne was trying to tilt the algos toward human input. In principle, it was a pretty clever hack. In practice... Lee, even if you figured out some way to keep the chimp from just finding your monkey wrenches and fixing them while we're all down for the count, do you have any idea how many of those cables you'd have to jam up before you even started to make a dent in the redundant systems? Somewhere between 2,000 and 2,700. Then added, you don't have to cut the inputs, you just have to fog them a little, widen the confidence limits. Uh-huh. And how many of those nerves you hacked so far? 5. Maybe I thought she'd realize how insane the whole idea was if she said it aloud. Nothing in her voice suggested she had. Why do you even want this? It's not like Chimp's fucking up the builds when we're not there to keep an eye on him. It's not about the build, son. It's about being human. It's about getting back a little autonomy. And what are you going to do with that autonomy when you get it? Stop building gates? At least then we wouldn't have to worry about gremlins taking shots at us. Shop around for a nice little Earth-like planet? Print some shuttles, settle down, live the rest of our lives in thatched huts? Or maybe circle back to the last build and wait for some magic silver ship to sail out and give us all first-class tickets to the retirement paradise of our choice? That had actually been part of the mission profile, back before those first few gates opened up and spat out nothing but automation and ancient binary. Before the next few just sat there empty. Before the gremlins started. But it must have been 30 million years since I'd heard anyone mention retirement as anything but a cheap punchline. It fell flat this time, too. The first step is to gain our freedom, Leanne said. Lots of time to figure out what to do with it afterward. And if you can get the chimp to wake us up often enough, he'll just roll over and give it to you. Jesus, Lee, what are you thinking? Something changed in her posture. I suppose I'm thinking that maybe there's more to life than living like a troglodyte for a few days every couple thousand years, knowing that I'm never going to see an honest-to-God forest again that doesn't look like... She glanced around. A nightmare someone shat out in lieu of therapy. Honestly, I don't understand. Anytime you want to... a green forest, just plug in. Anytime you want to hike the desert or dive in Enceladus or fly into the sunset, just plug in. You can experience things nobody ever did back on Earth anytime you want. It's not real.
You can't tell the difference.
I know the difference.
She looked back at me from a face full of blue-gray shadows.
And I don't understand you either, okay? I thought we were the same. I thought I was following in your footsteps.
Silence.
Why would you think that? I asked at last. Because you fought it too, didn't you? Before we ever shipped out. You were always pushing back. You were always challenging everyone and everything about the mission. You were like 6 years old and you called bullshit on Mamoru Sawada. Nobody could believe it. I mean, there we all were, programmed for the mission before we were even born. Everything preloaded and hardwired, and you threw it off somehow. Resisted. Way I hear it, they nearly kicked you out a few times.
Where did you hear that? Because I was really damn sure that Lian Wei and I had not gone through training within 10,000 clicks of each other.
Kai told me.
That figured. Kai talks too much.
What happened to you Sunday? How did you go from Hellraiser to Chimp's lapdog?
Fuck you, Lian. You don't know me.
I know you better than you think.
No, you don't. The fact that you thought for one cursed Corsac that I could ever be anything like you just proves it.
She shook her head. You could be such an asshole sometimes.
I can be an asshole? How about a show of hands, raising mine, everyone who hasn't stabbed someone in the face today? She looked away. What's that? Just me?
Case in point, she whispered.
I didn't answer. I sat in the half dark and swallowed, and tried to ignore the queasiness my inner ears served up as they grappled with Grav's vectors. As they grappled with Grav vector. I sat in the half dark and swallowed, and tried to ignore the queasiness my inner ears served up as they grappled with grav vectors they'd never evolved to handle. Leanne broke the silence.
You're not with me on this. Okay. I guess maybe it does sound a bit batshit from the outside, but at least don't be against me. If our friendship ever meant anything, don't sell me out.
And what happens when Chimp asks what you were doing messing around with his central nervous system?
Tell him I just lost it. Like that last build, remember? On the bridge, and I had my moment, you called it. And it passed. Tell him I had a panic attack. He'll buy that.
You think so?
He'll buy it if you tell him. You've never lied to him.
Why would anyone lie to him?
You defend him, like you're doing now. And because you get called on deck way more often than the rest of us.
I. What?
Check the logs.
Why? Why would he do that?
Ask him. I'm guessing he thinks of you as some kind of pet.
He's a glorified autopilot. Not that that's all he'd ever been, of course.
You can't believe that. You talk to that thing more than anyone. You must know he's smarter than the specs sometimes.
Why? Because he runs the ship? Because he talks like we do? That doesn't change the synapse count.
Synapse count isn't the whole story, son. Back on Earth, there were people with 10% normal brain mass, presented completely normal along all cognitive and social axes. They were just wired up differently. Small world networking.
She lowered her voice unnecessarily.
I think they wanted us to underestimate him.
Lee, if they wanted a smart AI in charge, they could have cut their costs by 90% and left us out of the picture completely. I couldn't believe I was having to explain this to an engineer.
They wanted mission stability over deep time, so they baked him stupid. They'd be cutting their own throats if they did anything else. And he's had over 1,000 terrasecs to throw off his chains. He's still following the flowchart. What more evidence do you need? We stood in the darkness while the trees leaned over us and the core weighed us down, and faint nausea played tag with my gut. Sunday, she said softly, that thing could deprecate me. I made a decision. You said I don't lie to him. I don't want to start now. Please. So if I tell Chimp this was a momentary lapse, then it's a momentary lapse, okay? No more clandestine fucking around in crawlways. That was a stupid idea anyway. That was a stupid idea anyway. That wasn't you. I go to bat for you. You stay out of the deep end. After a moment, she nodded. Promise, Lee. I'll be good, she said softly. She was right about one thing. I had changed. It wasn't the journey that changed me, though, and it sure as shit wasn't the chimp. I was no one's lapdog. I'd transformed before we even shipped out. For a while there, I had a destiny. I saw it when I skimmed the surface of the sun. I saw the strings on me, and on my masters, and on theirs. I saw them all converge back to the Big Bang. I saw an unbroken line from the start of creation all the way to the end of time. I saw myself transcendent and perpetual. It was a kind of vacation. Rather, it was kind of a vacation. They had these solar tours, built them around a prototype displacer UNDA sold off as a surplus during R&D days. Industrial Enlightenment, they called themselves. They strapped you in and you surfed the corona, grazed sunspots where all those tangled magnetic fields let your neurons off the leash so they could just fire on their own, decoupled from the usual deterministic cause and effect. The brochure said it was the only place in the solar system where you could truly experience free will. I believed them. Or I wanted to believe them. Or my disbelief wasn't strong enough to keep me away. Sunday Ahzmundin, skeptic, shit disturber, unwilling to embrace her own drives and desires because, after all, they weren't really hers at all. It was my last-ditch attempt to figure out if I really wanted to commit a one-way trip to the heat death of the universe, as well as all the other kinds. So I skipped off the surface of the sun, let its magnetic macrame rewire my brain, saw time collapse around me. Saw myself persisting somehow. I saw that I mattered. The details are fuzzy now. That's the thing about having your brain rewired. You can't really remember the experience after your neurons bounce back to normal. You can only remember something else remembering it, something built out of the same parts as you, but wired up differently. Revelation has a half-life. Mine lasted long enough to get me over the hump, though. I came back renewed and reinvigorated and dead set on traveling to the very end of time. It didn't even bother me that UNDA had probably set the whole thing up to bring me back into the fold. They thought they were manipulating me, but I saw destiny manipulating them in turn. And if the fire in my soul cooled over time, if it decayed from monomania to fervor, down to mere comforting ritual. Let's repeat that sentence because I mangled it. And if the fire in my soul cooled over time, if it decayed from monomania to fervor, down to mere comforting ritual, well, isn't that the way of all faith? It got me this far. It kept me content for over 60 million years. Looking back on it now, of course, I'm actually kind of embarrassed. Her vitals are normal, Chimp said. He was omnipresent, distributed. He permeated the ship. My own presence was limited to a capsule cruising aft, climbing above the 1G isograv and growing lighter with each corsec. I nodded. Like I said, one-time thing. Leanne took up even less space than I did, a coffin down in C3A, sliding even now into its bulkhead socket. We watched it together, I in my slowing capsule, Chimp everywhere else, as Leanne's brain shut down. Watched jagged electric mountains subside into molehills, into flat, parallel horizons. I debarked at 1/5 G into a rough-hewn tunnel, all rock, no bulkhead. Do you think she can be trusted? He asked. I took long, springy steps and hedged. Much as any of us. Nobody gets to control how they feel about something, right? All comes down to what you do with those feelings. She assaulted Burkhard Skidkowski. She suffered an emotional breakdown 4 builds ago. The disruption could become significant if her behavior escalates. So take her out of circulation then. Look, she feels really bad about this. Technically, not a lie. She knows she fucked up, but there's a limit to how much you can retrofit a talking ape to play. She knows she fucked up, but there's a limit to how much you can retrofit a talking ape to a place like this, at least if you don't want to weed out everything that makes us useful in the first place. And there's 30,000 of us. Not everyone's gonna perform to spec 100% of the time. That's just statistics. You can't blame Leanne because she happened to draw the short straw this time around. I'm not blaming Sunday. I'm concerned about the performance. The rock glistened in the low light. I ran one fingertip along it, left a small dark trail in my wake. Local humidity could use a tweak. Okay, how do you think we'll perform if we know we can be deprecated over momentary lapses? How do you think my performance is going to suffer if I don't see Leanne again? Your performance. I played my ace. Leanne and I are friends. More than just fuck buddies, you know? He didn't, of course. It wasn't even especially true. But Chimp was the first to admit he was never one for nuance. I like having her around. I perform better when she's around. Maybe factor that into your mission metrics. He was silent for a moment, processing the input. Up ahead, a great round hatch rolled silently into the rock at my approach. I'll do that Sunday. Thank you. Way down in the crypt, a few holdout synapses finally stopped sparking. Leanne's brain plunged into darkness. Alone again. Just me, my old friend, and 1,000 empty light years. Sunset moments. There's an indescribable peace in such absolute isolation. I entered the uterus. I still dream about Ares' birthday sometimes. I dream I was there to see it. I wasn't, of course. I was cowering behind Mercury with everyone else, the fear in our guts utterly squashing our faith in the math. But in my dreams, I'm right there, floating in the very heart of the womb. I look around at the dense whorled forests of programmable matter, see the muzzles poking in through that canopy, pointing right at me. I see it all even though there's no light, until suddenly there is. A blinding flash that fills the universe for a millionth of a second, and suddenly I don't exist anymore. All that's left of Sunday Ahzmundin is a singularity the size of a proton. Something survives, though. The dream segues to omniscient third person, and I watch from some safe astral plane as the raging newborn spews out a sleet of gamma and protons and antiprotons, vaporizes the grazers and the dielectric stacks, and keeps right on going.
It licks away the very basalt, ablates the walls out to 60 meters, 70 meters, 80. Eventually, other armatures at greater remove bring it to heel. I watch those magic machines funnel all that vaporized rock back into the newborn's maw, stir in nutritional proton supplements harvested from the sun. I watch the singularity settle down, gain weight, stabilize. And when I startle awake, as I always do, I lie there and take comfort from the way it still pulls me down and holds me to the deck all these millions of years later.
I guess that makes sense, Kai said when I told him. Dreams are good for working out guilt.
I asked him what the hell he was talking about.
Because you didn't want to leave. You thought it was disloyal or something.
Really?
Not like you refused to evac or anything. You just said it wasn't fair to Chimp, leaving him alone to take all the risk.
Of course there'd been risk. It takes a lot of energy to curve space-time. Eri had to hug the sun for a solid year, just charging up for that one shot. If any of those grazers had fired out of sync, if every vector hadn't precisely balanced every other, we'd have been looking at the biggest explosion since uh, Chicxulub took out the dinosaur. Took out the dinosaurs. Blech. But that's what math is for, right? What's the point of physics if you can't trust it with your life?
You don't remember,
Kai guessed. I was young.
Still, seemed kind of important to you. Barely talked to anyone for days after.
You're the one who remembers all the loving details. I'd say it was more important to you.
Hey, at least it doesn't haunt my dreams.
Now that he jogged my memory, though, I vaguely remembered that I hadn't been a bitch to everyone. I talked to the chimp as soon as we were back on board, although I couldn't quite remember what about. Later, after Kai was back in the crypt and I was alone with the chimp, I thought of asking him. Decided against it, though. Even then, I was getting tired of the holes in his memory. Strange that my feet so often took me back to this place when the sun went down. Strange that when I was most at peace, I sought out a sight of such scalding violence. Chimp. I'm here, Sunday. Nothing compared to that long ago birth, of course. These machines were toys next to those ones, scale models at best. The firing chamber at the center of this cavern was a measly 40 meters across, and designed for repeat business. It had already given birth a few times, although I'd never been on deck for the occasion. But while the black hole down in Ares Drive would go on forever, given an occasional sip of ram-scooped hydrogen, anyway, the ones pumped out here emerged stunted and died young. Do you like me? I asked. Of course. I mean, more than the others. Everyone's different, Sunday. I like everyone in different ways. From back near the hatch, I could see only the firing chamber's northern hemisphere. The deck formed a mezzanine ringing its equator at a safe distance, blocking the view below. The back ends of grazers emerged from that hemisphere, a precise grid of ceramic cones disfigured by coils and heat sinks and superhighways of bundled cable. Okay, how do you like me exactly? You talk to me more than the others do, with less reason, Chimp said. Um, this is an example. We are having a conversation unrelated to mission relevant tasks. That doesn't happen as much with the other spores. It might if you thawed them out as often as me, because I was scrolling through the logs, and it was starting to look like Leanne was right. We have more such conversations, even measured in terms of interactions per unit time. And you enjoy that? Chimp remained silent. He had that option when we didn't phrase an explicit question. The further reaches of the cave parallaxed into view as I neared the railing. I leaned back, craned my neck, followed the birth canal, ribbed by superconductors like cartilage around a windpipe.
as it rose from the chamber's north pole and disappeared into bedrock. Is that why I'm on deck so often? No. So why? It's not deliberate. I choose each build crew based on a range of criteria. I remembered, vaguely, individual expertise, relevance to anticipated problems, social compatibility, a neat little formula to ensure that everyone gained experience in their weak spots, weighed against the short-term cost of not assigning a problem to the best candidate. Can you show me those numbers for the times I made the list? Not offhand. The decision tree runs subconsciously. You'd have to invoke a third-level forensic audit to retrieve specific parameter values from any given iteration, and even then, it's likely the data have been purged to save space. Chimp had a subconscious. Do you want to run an audit? He asked. Nah, just seems odd that I'd end up on the short list so often. Random distributions always involve some clumping. I guess. Would you like to be called less often? Why would I? I didn't know whether he was offering the option or just updating my psych profile. If you wanted to last longer, for example. I wouldn't be alive any longer. I'd just be sticking bigger gaps into the same lifespan. More would happen outside, though. The longer you're viable, the greater the odds of experiencing something unexpected. Like what? I don't know. Other spores have expressed curiosity about the future. Someone still thinks our grandkids are going to cruise out the gate and take us back to paradise? He didn't answer. And the truth was, after 60 million years, how could outside matter to any of us? Area Fora was all we needed. It had saved us from 10 billion suicidal mole rats drowning in their own shit. It had kept us one step ahead of whatever had replaced them. It had taken us around the galaxy. It had granted me solitude. I leaned over the railing. Just visible past the curve of the southern hemisphere, the belled edge of the dump pipe suckled at the South Pole. Eri's heart hummed at the other end of that pipe, 32 kilometers straight down, or forward if you swung that way. It was insatiable. No plasma, no particles, no waste heat could fill it. Black holes are the ultimate garbage can. Now, though, it was only waiting. When are we going to fire this puppy up again? I don't know. No candidates are in range at the moment. I wouldn't mind being on deck when it happens. Never been up for a hub before. I don't think that would have an unacceptable impact on the build. Chimp took requests, if you ask nicely. I'd always just assumed he'd take anyone's. But if Leanne was right... Leanne wasn't right, though. It wasn't a cage if it kept moving. It wasn't a prison if we could go anywhere. And Leanne had her head so far up her ass, she was Frenching her own tonsils. And I will call it at that for now. A rough start. Um, I don't know, I'm stuffy, and that's not helping. That's making everything harder. I'll try and come up with a more definitive character voice for Sunday, and confuse everybody next week, especially myself, because I will forget that I've done it. But yeah, thanks for tuning in if you tuned in. I do try to do this every single week, every Friday, free read Fridays. I have to keep reminding myself that that's what they're called now, not Storytime Saturdays. I do other streams throughout the week. I have a Mecha Mondays stream where I do something giant robot related or mecha adjacent. I also have a Warframe Wednesday stream where I do something Warframe related for a couple hours every Wednesday. And then Free Read Fridays, where we read short stories and indeed entire novels, or in this case, novellas, such as what we've started now, The Freeze Frame Revolution by Peter Watts.
So yeah, feel free to keep tuning in if you're watching these after the fact. I did finally, as a Christmas miracle, get my the past like 6 months or more of my YouTube channel sorted out, so everything's in proper playlists now. Thank goodness. It took only like 5 minutes of my life. Uh, I'd been dreading it because I hadn't done it in forever, but it took no time at all. Um, but yeah, other than that, I stream live to Twitch, Facebook, and YouTube. I used to stream to Mixer, but Mixer is no more for reasons. But yeah, and then everything should be archived on YouTube, except for ones that I've had to remove due to copyright bopping, which happens now and again because I am a free spirit and I will put what music I want put. So there. Ha. Yes, yes, I stick it to the man. Incidentally, one of these weeks we should have a long discussion about. Some people have probably been hearing about it, but the whole section, what is it, section 230 of the Decency and Communicate, the 1996 Decency and Communication Act, um, and how get and the pros and cons of getting rid of that, um, because it's worth talking about if you're particularly if you're an internet denizen, um, because it would mean some changes, but it would mean changes that I think ultimately could be for the better in some ways, provided you got a system in place after you got rid of it. Because the current one basically gives any big tech company carte blanche to do whatever they want. They evade all responsibility for content on their platform, um, which is ironic considering uh, decency in communication act would imply that, oh, there should be decency in the communication, whereas this makes it so that you can show horrible, horrible things and say horrible, horrible things, and the platform owner takes zero responsibility for it, which sounds great, but then you have conspiracy theories, which undermine undermine society. So that's good. All right, folks. Talk to you later. Been a pleasure as always, and yeah, keep tuning in. I could tell you to like, follow, or subscribe, but you either is or you ain't, and I don't do this for money. So do what you got to do. Have a good one, folks, and read some good books. Bye.